Welcome to I guess, the last of this semester's guest lecture series at the NYU Game Center. We're very happy to have Heather Kelley with us tonight. Heather is a media artist and video game designer. She is the co-founder of the Kokoromi experimental game collective, which is focused on cultivating a community of people doing experimental games in the context of games as creative expression. Good. We'll get more to it. Good. She was also recently an artist in residence for Subatron Quartier 21 in Vienna. Is that right?
It's even more elaborate and convoluted than that, but that's fine. Yeah.
And she was the creative director on the UNFPA Electronic Game to End Gender Violence at the Emergent Media Center at Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont. She worked for many years in the AAA mainstream game development industry as well, working on titles like Splinter Cell, for which she did level design and multimedia design, among other things. She also worked on interactive smart toys, handheld games, online communities for girls. She was the Krauss Visiting Assistant Professor of Art and also adjunct faculty at the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon University. And she has, for 7 years, served as co-chair of the IGDA's Women in Game Development Special Interest Group. So she's here tonight. She's going to talk a lot about the work she's done developing Kokoromi and running Gamma, which is a festival or a game thing that they do. And we're very pleased to have her. So please welcome Heather Kelley.
Control my own computer. Yes, I did it, right? No.
You have to hit the flashing
Enter.
green light.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yes. Yes. So that was a great introduction. Thanks, Frank. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the origins of Kokoromi and of Gamma, but what I want to do is kind of relate them to a new buzzword that's kind of come up in the last maybe year or two called the new arcade. Has anybody here already heard the term new arcade sort of bandied about? No. I'm introducing you all to the idea of the new arcade. And I just wanted to point out a few things first that I'm co-founder of Kokoromi, but we are a collective, and the other members are Damien DeFede, Phil Fish, and Cindy Paremba. And this poster was very wonderfully designed by Rachel Morris. Is she here? I want to say thanks because it's awesome. Thank you. So yeah, new arcade. I thought Mark was going to be here tonight, possibly. Huh? Oh well. The idea for new arcade, the term new arcade, came up in something that Mark Essen, who's known as Messhoff, said a couple years ago on a panel about the context of presenting art games, and he was mentioning that the games, like not putting games in galleries, but putting them in a context where people could play them and have fun, but that there needs to be kind of a new version of the old-fashioned arcade, and started doing that. And Kokoromi sort of noticed this and started using it, and it also got used by Anna Anthropy and some other game pundits, indie game pundits mainly, experimental game pundits. And so I've been thinking about it more and more lately because I'm thinking about like the context of game presentation. So that's what we're going to talk about, showing you how Kokoromi started and how Gamma was a big part of that and how it relates to this sort of new arcade movement, maybe. We'll see. So the beginnings of Kokoromi were in 2006 when Phil Fish and I both worked at Ubisoft, and we didn't know each other, but we were both asked to work on a project at a place in Montreal called the Société des Arts Technologiques, the SAT, to make a game for this 360 device called the Panoscope. So I'll just play you this video and we'll talk about it. So this is a three-dimensional immersive presentation of a game concept that I had come up with about a few months earlier, I guess, called Lapis. And in the game, there's a bunny there. That's what we see. And you can interact with the bunny by touching its ears or its nose or different parts of its body. And if you pet the bunny in the right way, it will fly to its happy place, and you win the game. So this is a version of that game that was originally intended for the Nintendo DS as a concept, and then we just made new graphics and coded it so that it runs in this panoscopic device. So one thing that's really important about that experience that you see in the video is the interaction with the other people at the event. The fact that people were playing the game and they in fact had probably not really played a lot of games before. They aren't hardcore gamers. They're just people that were at this event, and that it was mainly a music event. So they were here to hear DJs, and you couldn't really hear anything in the game. It was mainly just like the DJ music, and it was quite loud. And so people were there with their drinks, and they were having fun, and they were playing the game, and it takes about a minute and a half to play if you're really good, and a little bit longer if you're still learning. And people would watch each other play, and then the ones that didn't know how to play would come in, and the ones that already had played would start teaching them. And we really, really enjoyed that environment and that feeling of like exposing an experimental game to people that might not play it before, and also that it was a social environment, and people were engaging with it and also helping each other and making it a lot more social. So pretty much Kokoromi was born that night. It didn't exist before then. We worked on this project for like a week and got it out, and then once it was there, we kind of like, wow, this is amazing. We want to do this over and over and over again. So how can we do that? Well, let's form an art game collective, obviously. So that was the beginnings of it. And just some stills from that where you can see people are like watching each other play and trying to figure it out. So that was the origins of Kokoromi itself, and that's the four of us. So what we decided to do next is try to make that sort of happen intentionally. We decided we were going to have an event where people would create games for the event, and in fact, part of what we observed is that synesthesia effect, where the music isn't really intentionally going with the visuals, but it feels like it does, and you get this sense of synesthesia. Well, what if it really was real? What if the music really was going along with the visuals because the music was creating the visuals? And so we decided we wanted to have this event, and we decided to call it GAMMA. It originally stood for Game Art Montreal, but it's kind of, whatever, it's GAMMA now. Some other inspirations that we had for that were other things that were going on, mostly on the internet, but then spilling over into the real world, like National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, Songfight, and the 48-Hour Film Project, which are all sort of short form. They're not really necessarily competitions per se. They're more like challenges where you and your friends can sort of sign up to do this thing and finish a project in some really limited time frame. NaNoWriMo, write a novel in a month. 48-Hour Film Project is pretty self-explanatory. And Songfight, they give you a title, and you and your friends, or just you, can write a song and upload it. It's usually within like a week or so, sometimes longer, sometimes less. And I was participating in Songfight at the time and really inspired by that, because having sort of a goal to get yourself to make something and a constraint so that you are limited in your choices was really successful for me. Some of the other inspirations that were going on, either at that time or up to that point, were, well, Ludlum Dare is actually something like the things on the previous screen. It was a game challenge that has been run online for a number of years. And then Indie Game Jam, an experimental gameplay session, started up, I guess, around 2002, taking place mostly at the Game Developers Convention. And the Indie Game Jam was a bunch of mostly coders and some artists that were already all friends and decided that the week before GDC they would get together and go bring all their computers and sit and just code games around a certain engine or around a certain technology, and then at the end see what happened. And now that seems like super obvious, but back then there wasn't really much like that going on. Now there's kind of been an explosion of game jams and things like that, but that was 2002, that was probably one of the first ones. And then the results of that, plus some other different experimental projects, were presented every year. John Blow started a thing called the Experimental Gameplay Session to showcase some of the odd and interesting things that he'd heard about. And that's been going on since then too. And it was always a jam-packed session where you just discovered all these crazy things that people were doing that you'd never heard of, and it was kind of curated or cherry-picked by John and a small team to be the most interesting stuff. So we decided to put together this event that kind of combined all these things, experimental games, but thematic and technical challenges, and this short form where people would have this social interaction when they were in the space. And so we created some restrictions. And these are pretty much the ones we had from day one. There's been minor variations or clarifications to them. But essentially the Gamma restrictions are that there's a 5-minute playtime maximum. We use a console controller just for ease of use. We don't have keyboards or anything. The gameplay can't rely on audio output. You could have audio in your game, but if you rely on it, no one will hear it, so it's pointless. So if a game relies on having audio cues to play the game, it won't work as a Gamma game. And it has to be pick up and play while drunk. That's pretty important. And then we also had some, not restrictions, but kind of freedoms, and that is that all people who create Gamma games keep their own games. A lot of competitions might require that you give all your rights or part of your rights or first rights or things like that to the competition itself, but we really wanted to encourage people to participate. And so part of it was that if you got inspired and you made something for Gamma, it belongs to you afterwards and you can do whatever you want with it. And we didn't want any game publishers as sponsors of the event because we wanted to make sure we could stay independent. So those have pretty much held true for the entire 4 years that we've been doing it now. So I just want to run through some examples and some visuals and stuff from the previous 4 years of Gamma. The first one was audio feed, was the one I mentioned, was takes audio from the DJ that's playing music at the event, feeds it into the game, and has to generate some kind of gameplay mechanical input. It can't be only visual. It can't just be background flashing lights that are flashing with the music. It has to be gameplay relevant. So this is the outcome of that. All my videos are always so dark. I'm sorry if they can't be seen, but there's always this problem when you have an event at night and you're filming, and you guys know that. And we had our event at that same venue. It became increasingly clear how important the venue is when you're having an event like this. The fact that they had all the screens, all the technology, and things that we needed for the most part. So part of the idea that you can see there's a DJ in the foreground possibly. Part of the idea was that the games are the VJ. There's never a VJ at any of our events. It's always the games that are the visual content. So that's also important that they're in projection and large. They're not on tiny screens. So I don't have time to go through every game of every year, but I just wanted to give you some highlights from each year. So from Gamma 01, I Have Big Balls by Sean McGrath. It's kind of a sumo wrestling game where you could see that wave in the surface is created by a sound wave. So it's rolling outwards, and there's a playing field, and you're this rolling ball of whatever, plasma, and you're trying to push the other player off of the edge of the playing field, while you're also being affected by the physics of this wave that's rolling around underneath you. Cosmo Crash. In this screen, if we didn't have any audio feeding in, there would not be any asteroids. So it's this racing game, a 4-player racing game, where all of the obstacles in the world are created by the beats of the music, whether like small ones by high frequencies and medium and low. And then we used a similar dynamic in the game that we made for the first year called Glee. You have these 3 different kinds of what we called pulsars, the little guys with, like, some of them have happy faces, some have sad faces. They appear on screen and whenever there's a beat of that certain frequency. And you're this sort of glowing white guy in the middle, and you're trying to sort of grab all these little other ones and take them to this nest, which is the yellow thing you see in the corner. And then there's enemies that are also trying to eat or attack the pulsars. And the pulsars also react to you by proximity. So some of them, the ones that are really close to you, are the gleeful ones. They're just really happy because you're saving them. And then the ones that are kind of nearby are sort of hopeful because they know you could save them. And the ones that are far away are kind of bored. And then the ones that are getting attacked are scared. So that's a few selections. I wanted to point out with the URLs that all the games that the creators wanted to be available are available online. So if you wanted to go to the Kokoromi website, you can always go download them and check them out. So the second year, Gamma 256, our theme was that the games had to be maximum 256 by 256 square, and we strongly gave preference to ones that were way, way smaller than that. Like, that's a pretty big maximum. That's not really very special. A cell phone game is probably that resolution. But we just made it the maximum because we wanted people to have some room to play with their resolution, whether it was going to be tall or wide or whatever. And so this was a really, really good year for Gamma. One of the best-known games to ever come out of Gamma was Passage by Jason Rohrer. Many people don't even know it was a Gamma game. But as you can see, it's 256 pixels wide and I think 16 high. I haven't counted it lately. It's the kind of game where you don't want to tell people who haven't played it yet because they'll spoil it. But probably everybody in the room's played it a few times, maybe. Is there anybody here who hasn't played it? Okay, go play it. It's the game that proves that games are art. You have to go play it, man. Yeah. Dodge Club, one of my favorites. It's a really difficult sort of keep-away game, kind of like Snake, but not quite, that is literally 8 by 8 pixels. So like every square you see on that screen is literally 1 pixel, but blown up to like, a foot. And it's actually really fun, as well as being kind of, impressive on a design tip. And Killjet. We have one of the artists in the house. I decided I was going to show Killjet. I think my favorite thing about Killjet is that it snuck in, and that kind of like it wasn't curated in the original thing, but when it showed up, it was irresistible. And yeah, so Killjet is basically a shooting, well, not shooting, a flying sort of avoiding the obstacle game that's trying to crush you, but it's built into this box that is an old monitor from like a security. What would it be, like a security screen? Yeah. So, and it's like all in one piece. So you see the picture of those two guys that are holding the box. They're actually playing the game. You have to hold on to the box to be able to play it because the buttons to control it are on the outside. And so that was Gamma 256. Gamma 3D. Let me play this. Oh, forgot it has an introduction.
I'm gonna try to be bilingual there for a moment.
That's the four of us.
We are some
So.
very proud to present Gamma 3D, Gamma 2D. Welcome to Gamma 3D, Gamma 2D.
Oh, that guy makes the best faces. So I guess it's pretty obvious what Gamma 3D was about. We don't really have to, I don't have to describe that or explain that very much. Part of what we've kind of done is at a certain point we became kind of contrarian, Kokoromi that is, and started trying to think about what was going on in the industry, the mainstream industry, and the sort of presumptions that it was making about what the future would bring and be, and the hype, and try to think of what's the opposite of that, and let's do that, and really narrow it down. So this was like right around the time, well, the Gamma 256 was around the time when HD was really coming on the scene, and Gamma 3D was, we thought of that around the time when people were starting to really get excited about 3D film and like trying to say it's also going to happen in games and 3D TVs in the home and things like that, which is happening now, so for better or for worse. There was a little bit of dancing. That's my other goal, is to get indie gamers to dance, and it's really, really hard, really hard. That's like but we succeeded this year. That was the good thing. As you saw, we're using the red-blue glasses for our 3D, which is called anaglyphic stereoscopy. And it has its own very unique set of challenges as far as design, especially if you're trying to make it matter. Part of the challenge was we wanted the three-dimensionality to actually affect the gameplay in some way, and we weren't even sure if that was possible, but we just put it out there as like, here's what we want you to try to do. And the one that succeeded the most in terms of sticking to that and really making a difference is this game, The Depths to Which I Sink. You can't really tell what's going on, and that's sort of the point, is because there was it's so hard to tell like where anything is in space, but so important to know. And when you put on the glasses, you can totally see it. It's just that when you only have these cubes and squares and non-figurative things, you can't tell which ones are at which depths. And so it's kind of like a diving game, but it really makes no sense without the glasses, and it's kind of the only one that was really managing to do that. So Paper Moon by Infinite Ammo is there was a few different games that were in this category of like, there was really only a few depths and you could move between them. But what we discovered is mostly they would also use things like parallax and other depth cues that you would have like in things covering other things. So none of them were really relying as much on the actual three-dimensionality of having the dual images as the Jim McGinley one. And then the one we worked on is called Super Hypercube. And the thing that was perhaps more interesting about this one is that in addition to using the red-blue stereoscopy, it also used the Wiimote. If you know the Wiimote hacks where you can have like head tracking as that's pointing at you, and you're able to use that as like your own tracking device. We used that and we attached it to the glasses themselves. So to play the game, you like had to actually lean around this sort of giant cube object to see where it was going to go through on the wall. It's kind of just, it's a little Tetris-y, but when you add that third dimension and you actually add the physical movement in, it becomes really immersive. And there was a lot of excitement for that game, especially because it's like in a big projection. So it's like at least as big as this screen, and it's like going to the floor, and you really feel like you're in there. Oh, I think actually, I linked a video, but I think my video might be online. I didn't. I'm going to try this, but it may just be like it can't go. No, I think it's online. I forgot about that one. I didn't bring it up yet. Oh well. It's on Vimeo. It's on our Vimeo. So that was Gamma 3D, and what we kind of learned is that with anaglyphic stereoscopy, it's really hard to make anything where the three-dimensionality matters for the gameplay. It's more of a supportive effect for the reality and the immersion, but not really gameplay relevant as much. We have too many other cues that do the job. So very last one we've had was just this past March, Gamma 4, and sort of in response to the frenzy over all these systems, not even Wii, but even after Wii, which are going to be like doing full body tracking and eye capturing or things like that. We decided we're going to go back to basics and do one-button games, so games that really only rely on like one switch, so you can only push it or release it, and you have time to work with. And we were going to see what people could come up with for that. And we aren't the first people to do a challenge based around one-button games, but we wanted to use that along with our other constraints of not gallery, but the nightclub setting and the 5-minute limit, and put it in with that and see how things turned out there. So here, I do have some video. Now I can do the magical switch, okay. Yes. Okay. And this is some footage that was taken and includes some of the musical. So in this case, the visuals are also a game behind the performer. So I'm just going to cut that a little short, but so that was this year. And let me see if I can go. So the first one I wanted to show you was called Poto and Kabenga. The thing that's interesting, oh, I forgot to switch screens, right? Yeah. Poto and Kabenga. The thing about this game, aside from being totally adorable, is that we were pretty sure when we put out the challenge that we were going to get a bunch of Cannibalt clones. If you've heard of Cannibalt, it's probably the best known one-button game in the last year. And it's really addictive and fun. And so when we did the one-button challenge, we knew that people were going to reference it, and you know, there would be a fair amount that came up with something like that. It's where you're running across these rooftops and you're jumping from rooftop to rooftop and avoiding obstacles and trying to stay alive for as long as you can. So this one actually is the game that we thought kind of sort of referenced that style of game, but managed to do the most with it and take it even further, while also being adorable. So you're playing two characters. It's hard to see the one on the top because it's been crushed by a slug, but you're this humanoid character and this sort of horse-like character that are a team, but the human has been eaten by a dragon, and that's the guts of the dragon on the upper screen, and the horse-like thing is running along trying to, well, like stay along with it or rescue it. And when you, I think when you hold the button down, Poto jumps, and when you let it go, Kabenga jumps, or one or the other. And so you're trying to coordinate their movements by watching both screens and trying to guess when you need to jump or to push or let go based on what's happening to the character on each screen. So that one was really good for answering the call of Cannibalt. 4/4 is a 4-player 2 against 2 game where these sort of, everything's a block, so I'll have to point at it. But this type of block here, there's one on that side and one on this side. 2 players control each one. One of the players is controlling the sort of a jetpack style movement. If you push, you can go up, and then if you let go, you can fall. And the other one is controlling shooting. and there's sort of a dual goal of shooting that radioactive thing in the middle of each of these enemies, I guess, in the middle. But you also could shoot the other player, because sometimes that obstacle isn't in your way, and then you can take a pot shot at them or whatever. So, but it, really fun in the way that it broke down each player's, that's the only game that was submitted out of over 150 in this particular contest that actually used a 2 against 2 with that style, and it was quite successful for that. And then one of our favorites, our very favorites, this game is crazy. It's called Button. It stands for Brutally Unfair Tactics Totally Okay Now. And so what you see on the left is the game setup with the screen, and you can kind of see the controllers there in the foreground, the 4 wired controllers kind of attached down to a table. And that completely impossible to discern image in the lower right is 4 players playing the game. It's kind of like if you take the dynamics of Twister or something, but made it really even more competitive in real time and sped it up and made it confusing. And it's pretty amazing. So the game, it's a party game, really. It's a drinking party game type thing where the 4 players are competing in different small challenges. Like it'll say something like take 5 steps back. Sometimes it'll say close your eyes, and there's like, of course, no way to verify. Like you can't close your eyes and continue playing, but it messes with you kind of like that. And then it'll say the player whose button is pushed third wins. So like just think of yourself playing that and being one of 4 people standing there and trying to be the player whose button is pushed third. Like what would you do? And that's what you do. Like it's kind of chaos. We're lucky there weren't any actual physical injuries, but yeah. So that's Button. So that was some of the highlights from the 1-button games. We also had an exposition of 1-button objects that were different sort of hacked contraptions and gizmos and things that some people definitely, there were some participants from New York on that as well. And I now wanted to talk a little bit, just like since I've shown you kind of what Kokoromi did, we weren't really thinking along the lines of inventing this new arcade thing, but when the term came up, we really liked it and sort of felt an affinity for it. And I kind of wanted to just look at some other examples of what I think are also approaching this idea and what it means and what it could be for the future. So this is actually an exhibit that when I was at Carnegie Mellon, like Frank mentioned, put together a symposium on games as art called The Art of Play, and Kokoromi organized the arcade for that event. So we had this is like sort of a panoramic of the arcade itself. It was like a combination between a gallery and an arcade, and that we had like next to each piece, of course, there's a little description just like in a gallery and like who did it and what it is and what year it's from and all that provenance and stuff. But they were all, of course, playable. So, and we had a really wide range of things from both historic games. We had a bunch of GBAs hanging in the corner. We had things like Res and Vib Ribbon and all kinds of different things. I think there was at least 8 or 15 different console types in that one exhibit. So I just wanted to sort of show that as like one of the very early things we did along those lines. Other people have been also doing some interesting things, like of doing the public display of games. In Toronto, there's a pretty strong indie scene, and they Jim Monroe started a group called the Hand-Eye Society, and they built an actual arcade cabinet to showcase games that were made in Toronto. So all like different indie games are displayed in this all-in-one arcade cabinet that you can actually go into like a space and stand there and play Toronto-based games. So I just think that the way that they built it and the style of it is super great that they're showcasing things that way. There's also a festival called Indiecade that's had, the first one was in 2007, and they have this festival kind of as part of other festivals. They've had them in a whole bunch of different cities, and some in England, some here, like some in LA. They usually hook up with other festivals and are like at the same time as them, and they've been doing a similar thing. They're more of a juried kind of thing where people have already made games and they send them in and they get selected and they showcase them at that. And then there's this thing called Baby Castles. Yo. Which kind of like brings me to the present and hopefully like the future, because like to me, it's sort of like bringing together all these different influences of having this physical space, but also having this social element, and having the indie games, and not having it only be like once a year like our things are. Like Gamma's only at a big event and like then it's gone, and we're really bad at the online archiving our stuff, so it's hardly anything there. And like having a dedicated space that is about showcasing indie games. And if you guys don't know about it, it's like in your backyard, so you should. And maybe in our conversation we can talk a little. I don't know if you were going to lead in that direction at all, but maybe we could, because it's just like I think that it's time that indie games had more, if not a permanent home, at least some kind of long-standing venue where it was about indie games or experimental games. You know, I'm using the words a little interchangeably, but they aren't exactly the same thing. There's plenty of indie games that are not experimental; they're very conventional or whatever. But I'm thinking more like the artistic side of indie games. But it has to be very welcoming, so that you want to actually play them and you want to be there, and more social, and that people do things like share how to play them with other people, and it's not just like an art gallery, white box, hands-off type thing. So we need this hybrid environment, and so yeah, that's where I'm thinking along these lines, and maybe sometime in the future it will even be more widespread. But yeah, that's all. Thanks. And there's another piece here in the illustration from the One Button Objects show. It's Thumpy, the beating heart.
So please have a
seat.
seat, and I'm
Okay.
going to now's the time on Sprockets when I ask when I ask a couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Hi, and so I guess my first question is what. So Baby Castles is in my backyard. What is it?
Yes.
It says you wanted to lead the conversation towards that direction.
Do
do people know what Baby Castles is? I don't know what that is. It looks awesome.
Oh,
describe.
maybe I shouldn't assume.
Yeah.
Assume. But I think Kunal
Go back
should
a
say
slide
what it is.
and bring it up.
If I bring on guest speakers to
Yeah.
speak in like their thing?
Is there a Baby Castles representative here?
Yes. Is there one in the house?
Maybe the king of
Yeah.
Baby Castles?
Yeah. It's an indie arcade. It's
Okay.
where different indie and experimental games are in rotation, curated, and displayed in a public place in
And where is it? Is it in Brooklyn?
in Bushwick, in Brooklyn.
So basically, just a really rough arcade where it's really.
Oh, that's your thing. Okay. Yeah.
Actually, a good introduction to it will be May 1st. I'm just promoting an event, but we do game openings every few weeks, maybe every month. And there's nothing to it. Like if it works, that's good enough, because it's a very visited space. So as long as people can play the games, like we can have an opening. So we do them quite often. So on May 1st, we have we're finally trying out like Mark Essen, and he's coming by, and there's this guy Matthew Hawkins that used to write for Gamma Sutra, and he's coming to talk about his experience working at Ubisoft. But after he quit Ubisoft, he made games like Jizz Mappa and everything like against like.
Get out. That's disgusting. No, that's fine.
I was told to go. And then some other Howard Head made their first original DS game after making a lot of licensed properties. They released this game called Glow Artisan for the DS, and it's a really neat puzzle game just about translating. I can't describe it. Like you have to.
Okay, great. So let's do this upright. So May
Yeah.
1st,
May 1st.
go to
Baby
Baby Castles, which is located in.
It's on the L train.
It's on the L train. So show up on May 1st. Go to the L train. Okay. So. No, so it's in. Maybe a URL or something for people to get more info.
Castles.com will be fine.
Babycastles.com. And what's up with the story of Kokoromi rejects? Is there a little beef? Is there? I don't want there to be beef, but if there is, I mean, this is my backyard. You know what I'm saying? I have to.
Why don't you say
Is this-
what is up with
Yeah,
it?
is it Salon des Refusés of
Yes,
games that
exactly.
weren't good enough for Gamma,
He
but are good
finally
enough for
put
Bushwick?
The words to it that neither of us could find.
For example, Tristan Parrott had made this game built into a CRT, soldered into it. That
Yeah.
You move up and down. You move this like.
Yeah, but we
landscapes up
did
and
show
down.
that.
Okay, so we ripped off a button and submitted it as a one-button game. It's rejected. Kokoromi rejects.
Well, it's a super awesome looking space, so that does look like fun. All right, so here's my first question to you, Heather,
To me,
Kelley.
I'm sorry. I'm just
Um,
very.
And I guess it's really just, oh, nice.
If you click through, there'll be like an address and stuff like that.
No one can hear what you're saying right now. Oh, it's
Okay,
about
you
video
get
games.
the idea?
Okay. So go ahead and shut that down. That computer can be shut down. No, don't. No. All right. So my question, my first question is really, like, why? What is valuable about showing games in public space? What's valuable about the new arcade? What do you personally get out of this context for games? What does it bring that you find
Yeah.
really valuable?
Wow. I think, well, I want there to be more exposure for people that aren't normally already playing games, and I think the social aspect of people sharing games with each other and talking about them because they're at the same place and the same time, and there's also a kind of community aspect of it for me, in that like people would congregate there that are interested in it and be able to have a place. Like, part of what inspires me, I didn't get into it because I just figured it was already going on too long, but the hackerspace movement is really inspirational for me. So like NYC Resistor, and there's many in different cities all over the world. And that, sorry, these are really, that the spaces themselves, the fact of there being a physical space with these objects, the games being in it, because everything that so far in like the indie game world has been like everyone's separate and they're working on their own or in their small teams or online, and then once in a while they get together and they're like ecstatically happy because they're around each other, and like I want there to be like maybe something that's a little more consistent, and that's what I'm like, I think that's part of it. So
Nice.
it was sort of community aspect.
Yeah.
And then, frankly, there's sort of legitimacy aspect to having a space that represents, we have arrived or that we exist, and so there's something to that too.
It's interesting. It's almost like atoms are another constraint. Like, it's so easy and effortless to just, there's an infinite amount of stuff on the internet, and it's so hard to get something working in a physical space that it indicates an amount of effort that
Yeah,
you're
it
making
does.
to put, and it sort of constrains you to focus on just a handful of things and figure out how to do them right.
Right.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the kind of the Freudian idea of the return of the repressed, which is what in this idea in
No.
Freud.
No.
So Freud had this idea that if you kind of like repress something long enough, eventually it comes back tenfold.
Okay.
So that's where like the source of so much like neuroses is from. It's like trying to control your anxiety, and then eventually it comes out tenfold. And in video games, I think the thing that was repressed is sort of
The body?
the human body. Yeah, precisely. That we get reduced to our thumbs and our eyeballs, and we're like floating on the couch. And I love the idea of like bringing back the human body as part of what games are about and what video games are about.
And it could mean bringing it back in the interaction, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
Yeah, even if it's just being next to someone while you're playing a video game instead of sitting in your
Yeah.
room and playing a video game and chatting with someone on AIM or something.
Right.
Is Kokoromi part of a larger community or scene that's like the Montreal scene or TIG Source, or how do you feel that you fit into these larger kind of communities?
I would say we're part of an ecosystem, kind of. You know, like I would never think that we lined up with one particular scene, but we have interactions with lots of different, you know, initiatives or things that are going on, like TIGs, and there's a pretty strong presence, especially with Phil. He's, you know, very vocal. And then we also, we cross over into a lot of different ones because Cindy's more of an academic, so she's doing a lot of writing and speaking at academic conferences about the same sort of things, but from that perspective. And what other things do we do? Well, I'm actually getting more, like I said, interested in sort of the hacker scene and sort of thinking about ways to make those overlap even more intentionally. And then there's, you know, art scenes. So I would say we like have feelers out in a lot of these different things, but we're not solidly in one or the other.
I mean, I'm really interested in this because one of the things that we want to do at the Game Center, is help to support and cultivate the New York City game development scene, which always feels like it's burgeoning. You know what I mean? It's been around for a long time.
Potentially burgeoning.
Yeah, it's always kind of like, I mean, there is
We're
a
almost
scene
gonna
here.
have a scene in-
It's maybe a little anemic, and
Yeah.
and I've always thought, you know, that one of the things NYU could provide is help in supporting that scene and giving it. And so I see the kinds of events that you put on, and you know, it just seems like Montreal has, you know, some of that going on. I'm kind of like thinking about ways to help and encourage and support a similar kind of scene here.
Well, it's
in
kind
New
of
York
funny
City.
that in that whole litany of things that I said we have overlap with, I did not even once mention the Montreal scene.
Right.
Like, interesting, huh?
Yeah, I mean, what's up with that?
What's up with that? Because I don't really feel like there is one.
Okay,
like,
good. So I don't feel so bad.
yes, no.
Okay.
It was really not unintentional in my omission. But there was, when we started, we called our event, you know, we really wanted there to be a Montreal experimental scene. And we're kind of like always doing our thing and like thinking, you know, maybe and there's even facilities and stuff that it could come to that, but it hasn't really happened, and it could be very location specific, that it's like a bilingual place, so you have like subcultures within subcultures within subcultures, or the fact that the mainstream industry there is so strong, and if anybody has interest and talent, they get really sucked into that pretty quickly, and so a lot of smaller artsy or indie projects don't get off the ground. They're happening in other places like Toronto, which until now has not had a strong mainstream scene. And yeah, but otherwise you'd think it would be really amenable in Montreal because it's pretty low cost of living and all that usual stuff.
What is the relationship that Kokoromi and Gamma have with mainstream like AAA development? Is
Contentious.
It's not. There's not a lot of great overlap there, or those people don't show up for the events and participate
Oh, no, of
and
course
on
they
the
do.
side, or
Yeah.
but where does the tension come from? Is it?
Oh,
Is it partly because what you guys are doing is specifically kind of a critique of a
it
lot
is
of
partly
the aesthetics
that.
of the mainstream?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's partly that. And you know, as a challenge to the mainstream industry to go a little deeper and think harder, and I think it achieves that because there are plenty of individuals working in AAA that are very interested in experimentation and pushing things, and but it's also a little more fun to not, you know, to be like a little angry.
Who all is in? What are the big studios in Montreal? Ubisoft.
Oh man.
And are there?
There's there's like only one that's not in Montreal. I
So,
can't
yeah.
remember who it is, but well, there's no Rockstar Montreal. So you know,
Yeah, so there's a-
Ubisoft, EA,
Okay.
and like all of them really.
And what about? Do you guys have relationships to larger like institutions, like cultural institutions, or schools, or universities, or like? How does that
Because
work?
both Cindy and I are associated with Concordia, we end up working a lot. There's a lab at Concordia University called the Technoculture Art and Games Group. And so we ended up doing a couple projects with them, like under the auspices we had an event at the Biennale where we did a live game coding and things like that. And then there are students at the different universities that are like interested in what we're doing and have submitted Gamma games and things like that. But there aren't really any formalized relationships.
And how do you like do the funding? How do you get space and is that through some of these institutional relationships, or do you have like commercial ventures that are donating their space and their time, or it's because that's also really challenging and difficult.
Yeah, that's been like
logistics of it.
The fact that it's grown as much as it has, and this last year I didn't really even mention it, but between the third one and the fourth one, we moved our event from Montreal to San Francisco, which was like way more expensive, and we generally do our events on the funding comes on an event basis, and we get sponsors, usually pretty small ones. We get a lot of in-kind contribution of like hardware and stuff, rentals for the night of the computers that the games run on and things. And then in this last one, our costs were way higher from the move and from trying to set up in a place where you don't have any real ties to anything, so they charge you a lot. And we ended up doing that through sponsorship from other indie developers and also through a Kickstarter campaign. It was about half and half.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that went really well because the indie community supported us both by being either direct sponsors or they contributed swag that we could give away as incentives in our Kickstarter campaign.
Nice.
So.
And how do you promote?
And the GDC, but GDC was like our main sponsor, so they gave us a lot of in-kind.
So you said you got 150 submissions to One Button. How did you promote it? I mean, that's a ton of those are games. Those are finished games that people did for this event. I mean, that's amazing. I know. What are your tricks for promoting and getting the word out and getting people to respond?
If you'd been to our site, you would probably not be asking this question because we haven't done any. But that's I'm not proud of that. Since we're all of us we have like this crunch for Gamma, and then afterwards we're like, we have to actually we're exhausted and we actually have to earn money to do doing the things we actually do for a living, hopefully. Right. So we're actually in the process of putting together a database right now that's going to get all the games from the developers that want to have them out. Linked to them. We don't host them all. We're at least just providing a service to send them out, and also going to have some coverage from a few different angles in some different media outlets like Create Digital Motion and some other music and oneswitch.org that does the One Button games. We'll be sort of highlighting different ones, but it's going slowly. It was a lot harder. That was one thing, scaling up to that. When we've normally had the most we've had in the past was less than 30 submissions, and there's only 4 of us, and we do everything. So 150.
So between the time you announced it and the time you closed it off for submissions was how long?
2 months.
2 months. And when you did announce it, was it just email or was it message you put messages up on message boards?
All right, so to get
source
them,
and,
to get the submissions, I can certainly talk a lot about that. TIGS is a one channel, and of course there's a few different indie media, game media outlets like Offworld, Boing Boing Offworld, and indiegames.com, and we did a press release, and we already kind of have a name for ourselves, so when we send it out. And we're not spammy at all. We only announce something maybe 3 or 4 times a year at most. So people are waiting, they know Gamma's coming and they're waiting for that. So we're lucky in that there's a sort of audience that's looking for it. Yeah. So we sent out a press release, and then of course when we did our Kickstarter, that was another thing where we had to do a lot of promotion to get people to notice that it's there and give us. And so we did a video and the things that you normally do for that. So I want to ask you about the
context, the sort of the public space context for making games and these. And I want to ask about. So I don't know if were familiar with Chris Hecker's talk he did recently at GDC, which was about exploring mechanics more deeply. Did you see this or hear about it?
Well, I heard him say what he was going to say, he was pretty convinced it was going to be controversial. Was it?
I'm not sure if it was all that controversial, but it was directed at.
It was like finish your game. That's what it was. Finish your game.
Finish your game, and it's directed kind of at game jams.
Yeah.
And at the content, at the process of a game jam, as producing these short form games, and his his challenge was, okay, listen. He said, I've been a part of this too in the experimental, game jam, that I've started, that I did and for a long time, and it was all about getting together and seeing what you could accomplish in 48 hours. And it was about tapping into that kind of spontaneous energy. But now what the world needs is less of that and more games that really go deep in exploring a system, in exploring all the opportunities, all the nuances, all the possible combinations of a particular idea, and that can take years. And like, what do you think about that as a potential critique of this more kind of spontaneous way of working?
They're kind of different animals, and I can't see why they shouldn't just coexist. Like why there's plenty of people doing, and maybe it's something more like. Phases of a particular project are like that, or phases of a person's career could be, or their creative output, and you can't sort of force that. I think when people are ready to go deeper, they do. I don't feel like people are intentionally being superficial. So who knows, maybe there's like hundreds of people out there that are doing that, but since it does take 4 years, they're not done yet. So,
Yeah.
And I think he's also talking a little bit to himself, because he's like,
yeah, I think that might be true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah, yeah. And what qualities of gameplay work best in that context? Like, are there particular games that you guys have looked at and thought, oh, this is amazing, and then you put it in that space and it doesn't work, and other games where you're like, not that interesting, and then you put it in the space and it kind of lights up?
Yeah. For the most recent one, for Gamma 4, one team submitted a 5-minute RTS, and that was kind of amazing, and for what it was really good, but it was really hard to, like, out of 150 games to think that a 5-minute RTS was the ideal choice for one of the 6 screens that we had this year. And that was a good example because the gameplay that tends to be right for the social environment is something that's more visual and visceral and where you really clear immediately what's going on. Not that it's simple, but like in an RTS, like the little things you couldn't even tell which one belonged to you, and it was just a little bit, if you were playing it a long time, you'd get it, you'd be in that headspace, but it was really hard in a short time frame to do that. So there are things that we've found like that lend themselves more or less to the format. And yeah, I did mention the with drinking, right, while drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
That
maybe I'm not supposed to, but it's
very
there.
Close to my heart.
Yes.
So the thing, sort of getting back to what you said towards the end of your talk, you would like to see, so Gamma specifically is kind of event-based. It's games for public space, but also for an evening, right?
Yeah.
Then there's drinking. And you would like to see something that's more persistent. So games in a public space, that's a shared space, that's open, but that is not necessarily so event-based. And is that something that you're thinking about or working towards, or have you seen other people doing it?
Part of this effort of putting that in my presentation is because I want to think about it and talk about it more, and so I'm getting you guys to help me.
Yeah.
What you just said were called for me, we did a little postmort on Gamma and with the people that with the GDC people. And one thing I didn't even show here is that we actually had all 6 of the games on the show floor at GDC this year, sort of similar to the IGF booths, and it was kind of a flop. It was nice to have them there so that the developers could have a place to go and show off their games, but it was really far away from the IGF, so that's where like the sort of magnet was, and then we were really far away from that, and there was no music, and the lighting was terrible, and there was like hardly any people coming by, and we were just like, wow, this is not Gamma. Okay, these are 6 games, but it doesn't work, So we're thinking about how we can if we do that again, and they really want to do it again, if we do it on the show floor again like that, how can we make our booth more Gamma-like? But I think that sort of points out that the games are really designed for that environment, and if you take them out of it, then they lose something or they need something else.
It is challenging, and I'm super interested in this topic as well. In fact, the Game Center has a show coming up that I want to plug, which is we're putting together an exhibit of games that are going to be 4 games designed for a kind of public space. It's going to be in the 9th floor here in Tisch, and we're calling it No Quarter. And we commissioned 3 of these games. So there's a Mark Essen game, and Matt Parker, who I think is here, it did a game. Robin Arnott, another former NYU student. And then Eric Zimmerman, who and who teaches at the Game Center, and a game that he did for the Art History of Games conference, but is designed for a gallery setting. And we're going to just have them up. I think this opens up May 6th is the opening. And I'll let you know how it goes. I mean, we're interested in this topic as well, like games like specifically the idea of public space as a context. Right. But in a more persistent, less of an event-based thing, and more of a kind of like you're wandering through the space, and it's almost architectural or sculptural as like a piece of public art.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a little bit about your own work and your personal work and that you've done. And first of all, I'm interested in how it relates to the stuff that you did, like in the mainstream industry, working on stuff like Splinter Cell. Do you see? Did you flow easily between those 2 things, or did you feel like uncomfortable or out of place in the more kind of mainstream industry, and how that related to your own personal work, or did you feel like, oh yeah, no, these are just 2 modes of operation?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, most of my personal work is clearly non-commercial, so I never felt like, wow, I really am stuck here. I wish I could be making my own platformer zombie game or something like that, Like, I don't have any illusions that I would use those same channels for selling or marketing or creating my own work. And
because some people do have those illusions. I'm thinking of Clint Hawking.
And sometimes they're not illusions.
They're not illusions. I'm thinking of Clint Hawking. They have those visions, right? Clint Hawking, who came and spoke here as part of the lecture series, another Montrealian. And it's funny because he's very interested in the expressive and experimental qualities of gameplay and interactive systems. But he does it totally in the
within
mainstream
the system,
space.
Right?
And so so it's curious,
Yeah, he's just willing to face very different challenges than I am. I'd say I'd put it that way, because clearly he's managed to get as far as he had through talent and tenacity. He is really smart, and he knows how to talk to people and convince them to do and work with hundreds of people and manage upwards. I'm sure a lot. I like smaller projects. I don't like to be on something for 3 years. It's more of a personal preference. The subject matter I like to deal with is really, at least now, not as interesting for the mainstream industry, and his subject matter, the ethics and things like that, are, I would say, easier to weave into a mainstream project.
Games about killing. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. I mean, yeah. Great. Well, I'll maybe open it up to the audience and see if there's anyone here that has questions. Yes.
Checked out both the Gamma 4 party as well as checked out the booth at GDC.
And I think because there was loud music at the Game of 4 party and the GDC demo booth didn't have audio, they kind of almost evened out the same way. But the biggest problem, I think, is there was very few people to play the multiplayer games or to get that kind of vibe going, and there just didn't seem to be a lot of interest from others. Like, I tried to even, like, hey, does anyone want to check this game out with me? And, like, I could, the only people I could usually find were the people who were at the booth, like, you know, representing their own game or running the game.
Which was hard for them because they had to be there all the time.
I know, it was tough.
Yeah.
They were telling me how tough it was, and they were actually swapping. One of the guys that was at one of them was a friend of the guy who made the game, so he could check out the actual show floor.
Yeah.
What was that one?
That was Button.
That was the one with the 2 players, one on top screen and one on bottom screen.
Okay, 4/4,
Absolutely
I guess.
loved
No, 2 players.
game.
Poto and Kabinga.
Probably one of my favorite ones to check out at the actual booth.
Yeah, the 1-player games will work a lot better at the booth. You're right. The 4-player games are having a really hard time because both of those games, sometimes you could have a multiplayer game and it's flexible, but the 4-player games we had really did require 4 players to be playable, and that was a trick. Plus getting over people's inhibitions to play Button, like all that crazy stuff about taking steps and turning around and, you know.
How dirty the floor is when it tells you to get on it.
Yeah. So that's really hard to do on a convention floor.
The other thing I noticed is, like, when I actually managed to play the game at home, is that to be honest, the sound wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. And I think often the sound kind of gets left out on indie games. And so maybe it's a good thing that you have music in the background instead of actually hearing the game sound.
Sound gets left out on most games till the end for both practical and, you know, reasons of being invisible, I guess. Which is, I'm actually a big sound aficionado, so I don't like that fact. But it's true, and it's sad if it's also happening with indie games, but that's the responsibility of the creators to get their sound up to par.
One of the games that we commissioned for this show, No Quarter, is sound only. So we'll see how that goes. That should be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So about a week ago, we had a Street Fighter tournament, and it struck me as you're speaking. So Street Fighter, this is a franchise and sort of a design that was born in the old arcade, right? I mean, like shaped by the old arcade. So I guess I'd have 2 questions for you. Do you think that the new arcade has a particular aesthetic, right? Are there games that are sort of being shaped, and ways of making games that are being shaped by the particular ways that Kokoromi works and IndieCade works, and some of these galleries that like Baby Castles or some of the places that Messoff has been. And the other thing is, do you feel like the new arcade has produced a game that you think you'll be playing in 20 years that you think will last the way that some of the games from the old arcade you still play?
That's a good question. So the first question was about the way that the space or the presentation environment shapes the design. Whether
can you see threads sort of emerging? Like, oh, I understand. Like, there's a specific strategy maybe in designing games that applies to, like, you guys have specific constraints like time and controller, but I mean even beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I think that it would be hard to generalize because it's more not to the space per se, the presentation space, but to the conditions of creation. So in our case, the conditions are that space, and so it's very explicitly stated when you're working on the project that that's what it's for. So yeah, it clearly shapes the. Well, I'd say it sometimes clearly shapes the outcome because some people understand that. And then sometimes they don't understand that, and it doesn't quite fit as well, but it still works because it just happens to be like a good game for that environment. And then sometimes it's completely inappropriate because they've never been to one, so they don't really know. So the idea is that giving that constraint would shape it in that direction, but it doesn't necessarily. And then for ones that are in something like that aren't commissioned in a way and are more curated like IndieCade, that's not really as relevant at all because people are making their games for whatever like format or distribution method that they need or want to do, and then it's also getting put in IndieCade, and so there's, it's not that their goal is not IndieCade per se. There isn't any standardization the way there might be in other media.
What about the idea of will there be a game that emerges out of this scene that will be around for
As long
for
as
decades?
Street Fighter?
Yeah, like the way that Street Fighter has done.
How many versions of Street Fighter are there now?
Well, there's Alpha.
5.
5.
Are they all equally as like?
Yeah, I guess.
So I think 42.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
like,
well, how about
that may be like what Chris Hecker was saying. Like, would he consider Street Fighter to be one of those deep games? Because it really does like go as far as you can go in exploring that particular, two-player interaction, button combo dynamic or whatever. But.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking about what Chris Hecker's opinion of Street Fighter might
Yeah.
be. The mind boggles.
Yeah.
But maybe you could say that that passage, which emerged out of this context, has had an enormous impact that will reverberate for a long time.
You could say.
So that
I
might
think
be
you
a
could.
that might be a
That's
good
one
example already of a. Yes.
And Catherine was first.
Yeah.
No. I'm going to dictate who goes first. Neither one of you now. I'm going to go over here. Okay, let's go to Catherine. Catherine.
Oh, I just want to ask, just as a parallel to that last question about like a distinctive style of game. Is there a distinctive style of play or player that you see emerging that you think is kind of viral that's come out of this scene? And if so, what does that look like?
That's really hard to say because my only experience of the players is at game conferences. So like, oh yeah, it's white dudes. So I'm not sure what it would be if it was in like an ideal environment, but we did actually want to design them so that you could meet other people playing the games, and in hopes that that would make it more friendly to like people who are social and want to meet other people. I'm going to leave it that generalized.
The Return of the Repressed. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know, Passage seems to be like a very strange case for Gamma, it seems to me, because so what happened to me is I played this game when I was still living in Berlin, and my friend was in Montreal. He went to Gamma, and I told him, I was like, did you play Passage? Like, this game, like, just blew my mind when I played it. And he was like, oh, you mean that pixel game? And I was like, what do you mean, like, that pixel game? Like, I was like, come on, like, we're on the same page normally, right? And he's like, no, I didn't get it. Like, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't understand the game. I don't think anyone got the game, because he talked to a lot of people that played Passage at the event.
Wow.
And he said a lot of people just didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, maybe, maybe it needs the music, and, like, you're sitting alone in front of it and dealing with it. And then he went back to it at home, and he loved it. So, I don't know.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think maybe it's true. I think maybe it's like, we recognized how amazing it was, and we put it in Gamma because we loved it, and it looks really great. But as far as like the player experience, it is more of a personal thing. No one's going to cry at Gamma, probably, but they're, yeah.
In that setting, right?
No, and like the idea is like you play that game multiple times, and our idea at Gamma is that you probably, if you play multiple times, it's because it's multiplayer, but you're not hogging the controller, so it's kind of,
It's really interesting. Like, you're not going there to play test it in the venue, and at the same time, you managed to figure out that Button would be great. So I was at Gamma now, and I was like, Button. I looked at that. I was like, we're gonna hurt each other. This is not gonna be fun. And then I started playing it, and I played it like 10 times, and people had to basically say like, you're hogging a slot.
right,
It's like, wow,
yeah.
This is really, really fun.
Hugger.
Yeah.
Right?
I think Button is maybe the opposite experience in that, like, when we test, we actually have, we try to have all of us there so we can play 4-player games. We were only able to do that, like, on one day because of our crazy travel schedules, and we all got together. And I loaded up Button, and I was the first person to play it, and it comes on, and, I just tried to pretend I was all 4 people at first just to see what it was. And I was like, what the F is this, Like, I'm like, I don't, And then Cindy picked it up, and she played it. And once there was 2 of us, it was like, bam, it was like magic. We just sort of, even just with 2, when we realized what we were going to have to do, it was like instantaneous.
Press other people's buttons.
Yeah, like when we kind of realized the way it's playing with your expectations,
Really cool.
it doesn't work with 1 person at all. And and with 2 we could see the potential and we could extrapolate. But we also don't like test with music or anything. I mean, with sound, we test with like having background music and things. We try to semi-emulate the environment, but
Cool.
yeah.
Just a comment on Passage. I don't think that because because Passage is unplayable like in a quick social setting with at a party. I don't think that makes it not suitable for an arcade. In fact, part of when I was a kid and going to arcades was like kind of oscillating between these social Street Fighter type games and just going to the corner to spend some time by myself with some game rules. And part of the idea of putting up an arcade for as opposed to a gallery for games is to have people that come back like a few days and like come to the space to play I guess Passage a few times over like and Mark actually echoed Mark Essen was talking about his new museum experience and his big criticism was that people weren't actually playing it, they were treating it as a visual experience, which is just takes away most of the game. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that arcade doesn't necessarily have to mean party, event, social night. Like it doesn't. Yeah, yeah.
It is weird.
Over there playing Dragon's Lair again and again.
With Messhoff's work in gallery settings, because yeah, I mean there's a weird conflict there. Like and sometimes it's amazing and it's great to see it big and loud and have the presence of a kind of theatrical experience, and to see it kind of puncture the hermetic white box of the modern art space and bring this like weird energy to it. And then other times you think, well, yeah, but that's not these people are not really experiencing what this game is about. Because they wander up to it, they wiggle with the controls, and Mark's games are incredibly hard and they require a specific kind of intense literacy that 99% of those people aren't going to have, and they're really just looking at it as an artifact. They're almost looking at it as a visual, as you point out, a visual thing that's almost like a reference to video games, and so there is definitely there's tension there. I mean, I don't know how that ever gets resolved, but maybe just as that kind of intense literacy becomes more and more common, maybe that's what solves that eventually. Solves that tension.
Or it's just not really like that's the problem of the interactivity in general, and the fact that it does have things that are not physically capable of being done by everyone, is that you sort of accept that you have you've limited your audience to the people who are willing to torture themselves or whatever.
Yeah, and I remember thinking or having a conversation with someone maybe at GDC where we talked about specifically this issue and saying, I mean, maybe it's a good thing. I mean, maybe the same is true of art, of gallery objects in general, that they actually, most contemporary art
are not incredibly accessible.
Yeah, it really does require a kind of hyper-specific literacy. And maybe 99% of the people who wander through a gallery looking at paintings are also really not interacting with them.
They just don't know that they're not getting it necessarily,
and no
the game
knows.
player knows that they're not getting it.
It's much easier to kind of waft through a gallery and have a shallow experience and still kind of signify and signal that you're a consumer of culture, and it's much harder to do that in an arcade. And maybe in a way that's kind of a good thing. Great. Maybe you as a participant are put on the spot more to demonstrate that you're engaged with something and making an effort to participate and have the literacy to do it. Are there other questions? I want to hear, and then we'll go back there. Okay, so you first.
Is the conception of the new arcade entirely electronic? Because it might be the area I grew up in, but when I think arcade, I think maybe 60% video games and 40% Pop-A-Shot, skee-ball, whack-a-mole, other physical, perhaps non-electronic things. And it just seems, I mean, has anyone tried to submit a non-video game and said, look, that belongs in an arcade?
Art foosball? Well, not for our things, because I'd say that'd be like that has specific requirements, and I think that'd be super interesting. I guess I should get to what I'm thinking is that would be really cool to have some kinds of experimental art, physical arcade games, but a little...
In the broader, I mean, outside of the game, I mean, when people talk about the new arcade, is it...
Just in general,
Are they
right?
just talking entirely electronic?
They're probably, they're talking entirely, video electronic games when they say that. those few that do, that handful of people.
Maybe I could
But
do
maybe they shouldn't.
I could do a quick shout out to Come Out and Play, the festival, the New York
Yes.
festival that
Yeah.
Greg Trefry and some other folks run, which does a lot of that, the street games and physical games, and a mix of digital and non-digital. So it's maybe a cousin, a fellow traveler with Gamma.
Yeah,
and
we
the
just
arcade
need to bring
movement.
back like Fluxus style.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
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 I mean, there's definitely a thread of that in the Come Out and Play festival. Did you have a
Yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts were on how these games can be preserved or archived, or especially with changing technologies,
Yeah.
kind of fragile technologies.
Gosh, I haven't thought too much myself about how it's going to be accomplished, except to be completely horrified that it isn't being accomplished. And the only thing I'm doing that I felt that I had the personal power to do along those lines is I started giving all my stuff to an archive that they have at the University of Texas, where I got my graduate degree, and they have like a video game archive, and it has like a whole bunch of big famous people from a long time ago and me. But I wanted, like, for one, I was really worried that if like I kept it, I would just like drip water on it and ruin it, you know? And that it needs to be, they have like people that are working on documenting or archiving the contents of things and keeping it all sort of housed together with all this other stuff. So that's my only personal contribution. And they actually did a project where they dredged up a product that I'd worked on like over 10 years ago that was like a smart toy with this like early RFID technology, and I had donated some like hardware and stuff, and they like went through all of the source code, and like they went kind of crazy on it, and like that kind of preservation is probably what it'll maybe not of source code like that per se, but that kind of attention and care and training to like, that's what it'll take, I guess, is people that are trained and or really skilled and obsessed hobbyists to like keep it alive somehow. Because just playing back anything on it, I don't know, it really worries me, but not sure how to do it.
let's go one more question. You, sir, in the back.
Can you talk at all about possible themes for future game events?
Oh, yeah. Let's give us a scoop.
You wish. We don't actually start talking about that until later in the year, because anytime we think now that we have a good idea, like things change in the industry so fast, and we want to stay sort of fresh, and we generally don't think about it until like July or August. And this year it might even have to be later, because we switched from being in November to being now in March. So now that's like even later, like October, November, I guess, before we'll really focus on that. Yeah, that's.
Can I
all
make a
say.
prediction? It'll be something to do with social networks,
Really?
right? I mean, if you're responding to like the anxieties and neuroses of the mainstream industry, then you know the fear of Farmville would be
Fear of Farmville.
would be a good theme.
Yeah. Well, I can say one thing, and that is we've discovered we have sort of a pattern of alternating between extremely technical types of challenges and way less technical but more conceptual challenges. And we just had one of the less technical challenges, so we're ripe next year for a more difficult challenge. We also have to face the 150 game problem. We managed to do it, but it was like, I think we need to have fewer games next year. So if we have a harder technical challenge, that will keep the number down a little bit. I hate to make it sound like that cutthroat, but
That's a good problem to have.
It is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
But if we'd had a technical challenge, I'm presuming we'd have less games, but they're harder to test.
Yeah.
Like one-button games are extremely, accessible to test, and when you have to test them all, yeah.
Will you do also? Yeah. Will you do GDC again?
It should be. Like,
Okay.
it's on track for that. We never say never, and we never say definitely, but it seems like it, yeah. Yeah, that's where GDC is always going to happen, as far as I can tell. So we've been asked to do it other places, and we're open to it, but we have limited bandwidth, so it just has to be able to happen with, magic or something. But yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Heather. Thanks. That's awesome.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all for coming. Thanks, everybody.